Good morning and welcome to our book club discussion. This discussion is on the book called Blind Spot. Now, typically when I think of blind spot, that the words itself, I'm driving down the highway. I know there's a car somewhere around that I can't see. I'm frustrated because I know it presents some possible danger. And if I don't get it out of my blind spot, then I know that it can create a major problem for me. And so I question, is there a correlation with my thinking and the book in some form or fashion? And today we're honored to have one of our diversity, equity, and inclusion members who volunteered to help guide us through this open book, open mind discussion, Jessica Reeves. And Jessica is from Northern Kentucky Association of Realtors, a realtor, and I believe since 2005, currently with Star One Realtors. She's a Kentucky Realtor delegate and Northern Kentucky's 2023 DEI chair. I asked Jessica, I said, Jessica, what brought you to volunteer for the State Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee? And she said, without hesitation, she said she moved here from Southern California, where she was in the midst of diversity, pretty much 24/7.
About that shower floor. Okay.
But she,
So that's going to, as you shower
Hold
over
on.
time, it's going
okay. But one of the things that she immediately noticed here was that she wasn't always in diverse backgrounds. She and her husband, they talked about it, actually sometimes at home. And she said that she wanted to have more diversity in her life, her work, in several different areas. And thank you, Jessica, for volunteering. Also, we have who I lovingly always call the Queen. She's our president-elect for Kentucky Realtors, who will also help guide us through and lead and participate in this conversation. And I don't think she needs any more introduction than Elizabeth Monarch. And so with that, I will turn the conversation over to Jessica and Elizabeth.
Thank you, Lamont. Sorry for that. I have contractors here in my house, so he had to ask me a quick question, so didn't realize you could hear. So thank you again. I do appreciate. Elizabeth, do you want to say something before we start?
No, and I tell you, there's nothing, they say when you want to get good at something, volunteer to speak about it or to teach it. So I've probably got way more notes than I need. But I always like to come prepared. So Jessica, if you want to kick us off, I mean, I'll be more than happy to kind of filter in some of my thoughts. And obviously we encourage participation. This is open mind, open books. This is a forum. This is a place where I believe we can share our thoughts and not be judged. That to me is what has made this forum and our open mind, open books so successful over the last year and a half. So Jessica, if you want to kick us off, and just know I've got plenty of notes if you run out of something to say.
Oh, sounds good. So I was going to start off first with the title, Blind Spot. And of course, this is the hidden biases of good people. And I thought it was, I don't think we all realize it's just ingrained in us. It's what we're taught, it's how we're raised that we do have blind spots and the way we perceive and the way we stereotype. And it's just, to me, and I have not finished the book yet, unfortunately, but in the little bit that I've read, it's just been mind blowing how even though I grew up again in a very diverse area, never thought anything about anything, differences or anything like that, how even I can see that I have those differences. Did you want to add anything to that, Elizabeth?
Well, I think in addition, I think it's a couple things, not only about, the title, but, this book was actually published in 2013. So, that's almost 10 years ago. And when I started doing just more research about the book and then started reading the book, I realized I was thinking, wow, 10 years ago, there's a reason why it ran up and it's on the New York Times bestseller. And it was really, the entire book just surrounds us about the critical analysis. And I think it's important, the critical analysis about stereotypes, prejudice, and racism. And I believe that, when you say hidden biases of good people, you bring up a great point, because I know that's another, there's so many things that we could talk about that this book brings out, because we all inherently, I would assume, people on this call, we all think we're good people, right?
Mhm.
And we are constantly striving to better ourselves. And so I think that part of the title definitely grabbed me and made me think, wow, I want to start reading this. So absolutely.
So like I said, so far, I haven't finished the book, but so far I thought the book has been very insightful. I've already gone through a couple of the tests. I don't know how many tests are throughout the whole book, but little quick self-evaluation tests, and again, very eye-opening. And it's just, if you haven't done them, go do them. There's actually a website if you want to do them online instead of either in the book or printing out pages of the book. But that so far has probably been my most surprising thing, is that, again, those the hidden biases are there, and I didn't even I'm not naive to think I didn't have them, but I'm also did not believe I had them to the extent that I do. And it's not even something I don't think I do, and of course I don't think any of us think we do, but I don't think I inadvertently favor or cater to or anything like that, but it is something that's made me think about, and am I, do I favor one way or the other, because the tests do show that I may in some instances. So that's so far what has surprised me the most. Have you noticed anything on your end, Elizabeth?
Well, I have, and I think that in terms of the book in general, and I've read the most of the book. It looks at a way that we were designed to function versus how we operate today, and it calls for true leaders to help guide us back on the right track. And with that being said, there are ways towards the end of the book. It starts talking about ways that we can avoid these short-sightedness by using certain techniques, and I think that that's very important, because towards the end, they talk about good people. And a lot of those tests that we start going through, I think in the beginning of the book, and you do have them throughout, you have these aha moments in thinking, whoa, you know what? And it actually stops and makes you think about, well, why did I think that, or why did I answer it that way? And do you want me to just keep going? Okay. So, originally, looking back on the book, I started thinking about, we all know that blind spots are weaknesses or they're threats to where people fail to recognize. Just like Lester said, when you're driving your car, that blind spot, and I don't know about you all, but I love the new cars because they have the little thing that tells you there's a car beside you. It helps people not make as many or have as many accidents. And, there's that saying that says pride comes before a fall. So when you're at your most confident, you're also at your most vulnerable to be defeated. And, that was a question that I started asking myself as I was reading through this, because, we're all reflecting on how we're perceiving other people and how we, how we all believe, because we're all on this call, we want to grow. And we're saying, you know what, I'm not racist. I don't have implicit biases. Well, the book makes you have quite a few aha moments. And, some of the examples in the beginning of the book, which I know our goal is to cover the first 5 chapters. I mean, what was your all's initial thoughts when he started talking about mind bugs? Of course, I immediately started thinking about little bugs, like we all do. So just to kind of get a little bit of interaction, what was your all's initial thoughts when because in my mind, I'm thinking, boy, he's going deep, I mean, talk about the psychological side of it. What was your all's thoughts and in terms of when he started talking about the mind bugs, which is the unconscious versus the conscious side of us?
Well, Elizabeth, let me first say I have read the entire book, which is a gray lie. I have not, but I think that's a gray lie. It's not a white lie, but no, I haven't read
Thank
it.
you. That's great because I love it. You're great,
Yeah.
great.
So yeah, so the first couple chapters, I was thinking, what does this have to do with, DEI? Because it kind of got into the mechanics, the clinical side of how your mind works, and talking about the white lies, gray lies, blue lies, red lies, the clear, was it clear lies? Those are the scary ones that you don't even want to say to yourself. You don't even want to. They had some quote by some philosopher that in a man's mind, there are certain things you'll only say to your good friends, and there's other things you'll only say to yourself, and then there's other things that you won't even admit to yourself that you think, which was pretty deep. I mean, that's pretty deep. But then he got into, the implicit association tests, and I think we all have those. I mean, it's kind of like in Louisville, we say, where'd you go to high school? Well, apparently now that's supposed to be a bad thing because we're judging people if they went to Atherton or Seneca or Central or collegiate, a private school. We are immediately making judgments about those people. I don't know that that's it. Well, it is true. It is somewhat true, but I don't think it's in a mean way. But yeah, I mean, I think there are, when you look at these things, he said that if you're truly a person that never has lied, you're in like this very small, and you will have no friends, because you will basically tell the truth about everything. And sometimes the white lies, you do it because it doesn't hurt anybody and you're trying to help someone else, not hurt their feelings. But yeah, it made me think about things in our business where we may lump people because they're from a certain country, or they don't speak good English, or they, whatever, it's easy for us to say, oh, I've been bitten before by that type of person, maybe in a transaction or whatever. So you implicitly, go to the next offer because you think, well, I've once bitten, twice shy. And I think if you've been in this business long enough, it becomes kind of a defense mechanism sometimes to use your experience and enact on it. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Did anybody else have any thoughts when he started breaking down and discussing the different types of lies? It made me feel a little guilty.
Well,
I think that was,
go ahead, someone, whoever it was, go ahead.
sorry, Lester, that was me. Just the realization that we're hardwired to lie. And that struck me more than anything. And then when you're like, no, I'm not. And then you break it down, you're like, oh my God, I do every single one of those things. And so, yeah, just that notion that as evolutionary beings, that's a protection mechanism. We are hardwired to lie. So I found that fascinating.
Jen, when we were at convention a couple weeks ago, we were walking from Rep Arena over to the venue, and I had a little cup of bourbon that I brought in the room, and the security guard said, "That's not alcohol, is it?" And I just immediately said, "No, sir, it's tea." And I kept walking. He goes, "Oh, that's good." My wife was like, "That was scary that you could just lie like that." I'm like, well, I mean, it's so stupid. I was justifying it. It's so silly that you can drink it here, but you can't drink it over here unless you pay for it. It was just, but it's a different liquor license or whatever. But that stuck with me I was telling PJ Moore about that with LNN, and she was like, "You lied like that?" And she was like disappointed in me. And I was like, my gosh,
Well, see, now you know you're an evolutionary being and you're hardwired to do that.
that's
So
not my fault.
there you go.
But I think that was an important part in the book itself. It allows us to slowly start thinking and put ourselves in these places where we live every day automatically anyways. And it allows us to say, boy, here's the background that I didn't understand. And it does go deep. I agree with you, Lamont. You know, it's well researched, and we don't always like to read research. We like to read the book, but it gave us an understanding, a clearer understanding that, hey, this is a world that we're in. We make conscious decisions, but hey, we make a ton of unconscious decisions that affect a lot of things that are going on around us every single day as well in our lives. And sometimes we do tell what is a white lie, or it goes deeper to the red or the blue lies, and or the gray lies, as you talked about. And so I think after that first test, and maybe they set it up that way to decide whether we liked insects or plants or neither. At that point, it opened my eyes a little bit more and said, okay, let me start thinking about the decisions that I make and how I go about these things. And so, and then they led you finally, or eventually, to a place as to where it could, if we make decisions like this, it could affect a real estate deal. It could affect, if you're a mortgage person, somebody getting a loan because we trust this person is going to be more successful at getting it done. So do we lean toward that person as opposed to someone else? So it is quite revealing, and particularly the conscious and how many unconscious decisions we make in a day's time is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, going on those IAT tests, the implicit tests. I did when I did the flower bug one, and I don't know how many of you guys were different. I was the same on both, but I also like bugs. So I was like, oh, of course, bugs are good. Yeah. And I didn't have a problem with it. It was the second test that I went, why is this so different? It was very interesting that it was so different when the first set would, for me, was basically the same. I don't know if you guys had it different or something mind-blowing with those tests.
My problem with the test was I'm listening to it on Audible. So it was, I had to take another step and go back to my computer. So I haven't been able to do that.
Is that
Well,
a white lie?
yeah.
Is that a white lie, a red lie, a gray lie, or a blue lie, Lamont?
Yes. Yes.
Or a colorless.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't even say that to myself.
You know, and I will say, I felt like in the beginning of the book, to some degree, I felt like I was back in college where I read it and I was like, okay, I got to go back and reread that first part, because if I don't get the first chapter, I'm not going to be able to set up, you know, what it's really wanting me to learn. And when we were talking, you know, before they kind of went into the chapters about the different types of, you know, the shades of truth. I like that title of that chapter, Shades of Truth. I really had to wrap my mind around, again, the mind bugs, like the social mind bugs, where they stated, you know, it affects decisions not only about others, but also about ourselves. And I'm coming from the standpoint that back when I was going through school, you know, my parents were like, oh, you don't need any psychology classes. Well, now in the world that, you know, in the business that we're in, I wish I had majored in psychology, because that's really what we do every single day. And, you know, I feel like once I've got my mind wrapped around what he was really talking about with the mind bugs, it kind of helped me to some degree when I started taking a lot of the tests. So.
Yeah, hey, Elizabeth, I started to kind of skip through the test as well. But I opted not to. I actually went out and bought I had the Audible, and I went out and bought a book. I found one at secondhand bookstore, and it still had the test in it, $8 whole. But it was interesting being able to do that. So Lamont, I copied these tests. So if you're interested in them, I can actually send them to you as well.
Yes, shoot them over to me.
Well, and there isn't a website, the book only, well, at least so far that I have, has the bug flower and then the second test, and Elizabeth says there's more, but on the website, they actually have going into male, female, sexuality, nationality, stuff like that. So if you want to do more than just the couple that are in the book, go to the website.
I think, you know, for anybody that maybe is just joining us, and life is crazy right now for everybody, if you haven't had a chance to, you know, kind of crack open and read the first couple chapters, what I felt like what the authors are doing is they're really setting you up and making you have those aha moments of recognizing when, you know, they're setting up that conscious and that unconscious. And I think everybody on this call has sat through the implicit bias. We've sat through Fairhaven. And then when you start reading through this, and then especially when he gets to the shades of truth, and you're like, ooh, you know what? I do that, and I didn't think about that. Lamont, I'm going to use you just because you just told the story. You know, you said it's sweet tea. Well, you know, you didn't sit there and think 10 minutes on what you were going to say to the guard when you walked out, right? So you just unconsciously just said sweet tea.
I'm a really good liar. I mean, that's just, apparently.
So I really think the authors do a great job to try to establish and set up and make it personal, where you personally stop and start thinking about, wow, you know what? Maybe I didn't realize I was doing that. I thought that I was not biased, but based on my environment and I'm a good person, that's just a little white lie. And he really is setting you up for the latter chapters of where he gets into, you know, the race IAT test, and the, you know, talking more about the impression management. And of course, I wrote a bunch of notes on that. But does anybody else have any thoughts about, you know, the mind bugs and the shades of truth, and what your thoughts were when you were reading through chapter 1 and 2?
Well, as far as the shades of truth, some of those shades of lies are stuff that we do to be able to, well, to function, but then also to have relationships. I mean, you know, do I look good in these jeans? Well, if you want to stay married, you're going to say, yes, you look good in those jeans, because there's just certain things you got to do to appease the peace, you know, for lack of a better word. But it was interesting to see how he broke them down and the way he broke them down. And like I said, it was very, very eye-opening in that respect for me.
Kind of off topic a little bit, but something I thought was really interesting. I was watching TV the other morning, and they were interviewing Norman Lear. He's 100 years old, and he's coming out with a new show. But they were talking about All in the Family, the Jeffersons, a lot of the Good Times, a lot of the shows that he did 45, 50 years ago. And he said, and they were so controversial back then because they touched on everything and talk about bias. But he said, I would not change one word in any one of those scripts, because things have not changed that much when it comes to our biases. We still, you know, this George Jefferson and Archie Bunker going at it. I mean, that was just hilarious, but they both came into the situations with a lot of baggage. And it was just interesting to watch that, and to think 150 years later, for Norman Lear to say he wouldn't change a word, that it still is relevant today as it was back then, kind of reminded me of all of this, how we're just hardwired with all this baggage.
It goes back to the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Well,
Parts of this
and-
book made me feel bad. Go ahead, Lester.
well, and Elizabeth, you were talking about how it sets you up. You know, there are a lot of us that truly believe, you know, we don't have any biases, any implicit biases, any biases of any kind. We truly believe that. Now, slowly, as you walk through this, you know that that's not possible. Now, you may continue to lie to yourself and say that, but you realize that it's not possible to live in the world that we live in without some type of biases. And that's the setup that I saw coming. And I thought that was really interesting how he opens you up early. So I'm interested in seeing what happens right in the end as well.
Anybody else have any takeaways?
Well, more to what Lester's saying. I'm sorry, my computer just went out on me, so I'm having to use my phone.
Working.
But I misunderstood the assignment, and I read the whole book.
Oh,
Wow.
that's okay. You can read the whole book, just not everybody has been able to read the whole book.
Yeah, I just did it because I misunderstood. I wouldn't have read it if I had known.
No, reading is fine.
I just cram right through it. And upon reading it, what Lester's saying is even more true as you get through the book. The first 5 chapters is really just a setup. It's a setup so that we can understand more readily the rest of the book. And I don't want to be a spoiler, so I'm not going to do a spoiler on it. But chapter 7 and chapter 8 are pretty heavy chapters, and they get into some stuff that you really needed the first chapters to set you up for, to even be able to deal with those. So we'll see as we get through that. I don't want to be a spoiler, but we'll see as we get through that. These first chapters are just setups with understanding mind bugs and all that. Is a setup for what we've done to deal with later in the chapters to come, especially chapters 7 and 8.
So Curtis, you're saying we got to read the book and then reread the book.
No, we got to read further than chapter 1 and 5.
No, I'm saying you read the whole book and then you read it again because now you got stuff from the end that you want to see at the beginning.
Oh yeah. Well, I've forgotten what was in the first chapters after reading the chapter 7, 8, 9. I mean, it was just that's really all you need to read in the book. But you need to read the first chapters to set you up for that.
Right.
So.
Well, and I think what's interesting is, and not that I really follow timelines, but I think that, like you mentioned, Curtis, in the latter chapters, they really do reference back with timelines. And when he's going through chapters 1 and 2, it talks about the truth, the shades of the truth, and then he walks you into chapter 3, which is into the blind spot. Gives you a little bit of background information about, he, when I say he, that's Anthony, one of the authors. He developed this test back in the 1990s. So, I was sitting there, that kind of caught me when I was like, okay, 1990s, then they write the book in 2013. So, I think it's pretty important in terms of when, as Lester and Curtis said, the book does set you up when they start talking more about a new kind of test. That was a test that was set up to measure the implicit bias using mental associations. And, I was always taught, if you're thinking this way, you could just be tough, get tough, Elizabeth, get tough and just change the way that you're thinking about it. And I think that there are certain things that you can change the way you're thinking about it. But again, we're all good people. And, by taking, and he starts out, Jessica, as you mentioned, that first test, and Lamont, if you grab the book, and Lester, you grab the book, it talks about the insects. And, it walks you through taking that test about the insects and about the deck of cards, and which one is easier. And what I found that was really, really important is this test was really about the explicit belief in the equality side of it. And when he started doing this, I mean, you know, he starts arguing the implicit racial bias that it does exist. Even if people say, I'm not racist or I'm not prejudiced, I mean, he really starts laying that foundation to say, whoa, 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 I'm going to walk you through this and show you that you may think you're a good person, and you still are a good person, but you still have these implicit biases. So.
And what's interesting, Elizabeth, is when we tie this back to what we're doing as realtors now,
Yes.
I'm telling you, NAR is spending a lot of money on that side in diversity and inclusion and implicit bias and all that. Well, even here at KYR with the training that we now have. And so it's important that we can connect, but yeah, he doesn't leave you hanging out there. He starts helping you connect those dots.
One of the things that I'm reading, I either just read or I'm reading right now, which well, it seems like I see a lot. Well, it seems like we see a lot in politics. With somebody who says, or religious factors or somebody who's like, oh, I'm so anti, you know, for instance, what is his name, Walker or whatever. That's, you know, anti-abortion, I'm anti-abortion. And then you find out he's had women who's had girlfriends who's had multiple abortions. And they talk about, you know, people who are so adamant, this is the way I am, or good, you know, I'm so pro, I'm a feminist, I'm this, I'm that. And then what their actions are completely different, and making that connect, you know, realizing where our disconnect is and making it connect. That's been an eye-opening section for me too.
Well, Jessica, one of the things when you start talking about that, one of the examples that they gave was how a few years ago we started seeing all these gay politicians that came out, but they had been talking against gay rights or for years and years and years, but yet and still you know, what they were saying didn't fit
What they
who
were
they
doing.
were or who they are. And so I thought that was interesting. And then you start moving from there, I think, into the stereotypes as well.
Right. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now, is stereotypes. So how and of course open to anybody, but whoever, Elizabeth or whoever, but how do you think all this can affect us as a realtor or in our business? I know we kind of touched on a little bit, but what are your guys' thoughts?
I think it makes us stop and realize, as I was reading this, I thought to myself, we choose candidates based on how they look. We choose, Ted Bundy had a baby face, so everyone trusted him. We will, even if we accept, let's say it's a multiple offer situation, asking the question in real estate, we get 5 offers in, and one of them is from a company that we don't feel like have well-trained agents, or that we don't feel like understand the business as much. We don't give as much credibility possibly to that offer as we would to some of the other offers. Things that we do in that respect, things that we do where maybe young people we feel like don't take us seriously. So when they come in and talk about wanting to look at houses, we may insist that they get pre-qualified first versus someone who's bought and sold several houses, and we figure they know what their finances are. Or I made the mistake one time of working with a banker, assuming he understood mortgages. He was clueless, completely ignorant about mortgages. He understood banking, but he had never dealt with mortgages. And so he was buying a house for the first time, and boy, did I screw up by just assuming things that he knew. And so it's it's that assumption that we make of people, or if someone has injured us in the past, we can associate other people that we meet in the future, thinking that person reminds me of so-and-so, and so automatically we hold back from that person when there's no correlation between that person and the one that maybe hurt us in the background or something.
Right. And it makes, I think a lot of us have seen the Long Island Divide video, and reading through the stereotypes and doing the IAT tests and stuff like that. Not to justify Long Island, when what they did, but it makes me wonder how many of those were so unconsciously making those decisions that they did as they did. I'm not thinking properly. I'm not articulating properly, but it was just, it keeps making me go back to the Long Island Divide and what they said and how they said it and why they said it, and going, how many of them really realized what they were saying?
I think they
And-
felt justified. I think within
Yeah.
their own mind, they felt justified. As wrong as it was, they justified. There was something else that the book said, we present ourselves as we believe ourselves to be.
Mhm, mhm.
That was an astounding statement, because we do, as Elizabeth said, and some of the other ones said, we would like to think that we don't have a prejudice, or we don't have a bias, or that, but all of us are impacted on either childhood or youth things or school things or adult things or marriages or relationships or families or whatever, that put us on guard with certain people and with certain this or that and the other. And so consequently, we prejudge people when we should not prejudge people. I think that's one thing that this book has to get across to us. You cannot afford to prejudge anybody.
Right. Right. Exactly.
You're muted, Lamont, if you're
Yeah.
trying to talk.
Two things come to mind. I always have random thoughts, so bear with me. One is kind of the reverse of that. So think of Undercover Boss. Have you ever watched that show? They take the CEOs of these big companies and make them look like something different, and then put them in that environment, and people, judge them. They don't take them seriously. They make certain assumptions about them. And then another thing is Diane Sawyer has this documentary, or this thing coming out with Matthew Perry from Friends. He was doing 70 Vicodins a day. And she said, how on earth did you even get that much? One of the things he would do is, get all cleaned up and go to open houses and steal drugs out of medicine cabinets, because nobody thought he would be that guy, because, he's successful and look at him. He looks, but I thought, it's funny how if that person had been whatever, someone that looked like a shady person, we'd be all over him. So sometimes it can cut kind of both ways. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting that he said that this morning, that he went into open houses in like LA, and just, that was his thing. He would steal drugs on Sundays. That is all.
Anyone else want to chip in on that?
I'm just gonna say that happens at airport security lines too, if you notice, like traveling to Florida. Well, I went on an L-Bar cruise with Libby Taylor years ago, but anyway, we're blonde, white skin, blue eyed. We don't have we didn't do the pre-TSA check, whatever it is, but we always got through. We didn't have to take off shoes, and everybody else that's all different colors and ethnicities, they're all standing in line for hours, and we're waved through. And it made me just want to go get in the line and say, this isn't fair. And I was talking to my daughter about it, and she's dating somebody from Spain who isn't like my daughter, white skin, freckled, red hair, blue eyes. And he gets held up in customs every time. And it's hard for him to travel, and he's treated differently. And it's shameful. I mean, it just really, it bothers me. And even a restaurant in Lexington, the waiter couldn't understand him, and he speaks excellent English, but it's, you know, he really, I don't know. It's heartbreaking what we do and how we perceive people based on how they look.
I get swabbed every time I go through TSA. I get swabbed every single time.
Mhm.
I think they think I'm just a mean old woman who's gonna just carry some drugs and paraphernalia and you know, all this stuff that I've confiscated and everything. And they check the TSA checks my bags every time.
Wow.
Yeah, so, yeah. I must be a bad they must have something on me that they haven't told me about yet.
Well, my sister is actually kind of different, but on the subject, but my sister was telling me at her work, she's got a coworker apparently they've got a part of their workforce is Muslim, and must have been doing the morning prayer. And the coworker came back and was talking to my sister and was saying how she doesn't believe there's all these different ethnic people. Why are they here? There's so many immigrants. It's horrible. And you know, they're terrorists and they're going to bomb things. And my sister's like, you know, there's been more American terrorists here in America than outside. And you know, and my sister's like, for all I know, you're a terrorist. And she goes, no, of course I'm not. I was born in America. Like that automatically assumes you're not going to be a terrorist. It's just crazy, the thought process that goes on in all of our heads, not just her head, but in all of our heads, of what is right and what is wrong, and the justification you give yourself for.
Well,
your beliefs.
we're talking about the stereotyping now, I guess.
Yes.
And so
We
one
are.
of the things, one of the examples that they gave was the father and the son who were in a really bad car accident. So bad that the father was killed during the automobile accident. And then they take the son who's in bad condition to the hospital. And as the son's in the hospital, the surgeon comes out and the surgeon says, I cannot operate on him. He's my son. And everybody's sort of thrown with that statement. And they're thrown because they assume that the surgeon is a man,
Mhm,
but the surgeon is a woman, and that's his mother.
mhm.
Yeah, so those are the type of assumptions that we tend to make in life, and we've run into them. I've run into them at different times before, and so again, I think this book challenges me to, as we want to be lifelong learners, to learn more about ourselves. That's really what it does. It challenges you to continue. You know, they say, well, if you want to study and know more about your body and all that, that's one thing. But how important is it to know about your mind and how you think? So I think that's a big takeaway for me here.
Well, oh, go ahead, Miss Pam.
I just wanted to follow up. I think that's an outstanding statement, because starting at the very first book that we started out with this gathering, it was The Color of Law, which explained what had taken place across the land. That was something that had come about that way. Now we're in the part where, how does this impact you? So many things that we've read are things that are in the history or behind us or in other parts of the country or that type of thing. Now we're hitting home with, we need to stop and take a few minutes before we jump to conclusions, before we just naturally draw a perspective that we should not be allowed to entertain. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I absolutely agree with you, Pam and Lester. And, you know, it made me think about when we were talking, he talked in chapter 3, you know, in terms of those tests and, you know, talking about the hidden bias. And he doesn't play around. He just comes out and says it's hidden bias against race, you know. And I mean, I appreciate that, because it's like he doesn't, you know, beat around the bush. It's like, we, there is an automatic unconscious for the majority of people that took this test for white preference. Okay. And that, a lot of times people will, and I'm going off my notes. I can't even read my own handwriting. It's what they want to hear or to make themselves look more favorable. So, that again, Lester, as you mentioned it, and Pam, as you mentioned it, it made me personally stop and think, oh, wow, okay, he's just going right to the gut. And, making the statement saying, okay, do we sometimes tell people what they want to hear when it comes to that? So, and then that leads into, as you mentioned, Lester, it builds the idea of hidden biases, which then goes into the stereotypes of funnel of individuals. And, that's where he talked a lot about many people are not aware that they carry those stereotypes, placing them in some type of realm of hidden biases. And it's those hidden biases that I think it's important in what we do in our everyday job or career, that we have to become more and more aware of. So.
Do you know what I think is stupid? When I see a sign that says everybody must wash their hands, don't drink the battery acid, don't, and so I categorize this as just stupid across the board when I have to stop and realize that some people really don't know. And so that's just a comical response to when I see some of these ridiculous signs. Who's going to eat their lipstick? Well, some kid might, or, so.
Well, and some of those too are lawsuit driven. After they've had one lawsuit, they're like, well, okay, we'll just put this on to a CYA, and then, if they do it, then at least I don't have
to. Yeah, I just have to laugh at it and be careful to make sure I don't categorize everybody in that, category. So,
right.
Yeah.
Sticker of all times is it was on a wheelbarrow that said this vehicle is not appropriate for highway use. So
Yes.
I want to know how that one came across.
Or the, no livestock on the freeway. Why would you take your livestock on the freeway? But obviously there's been somebody enough who's done it that, there you go. It makes you wonder.
Yep.
So we talked a little bit about how it can affect us as realtors. What do you think is the effect with bankers or mortgage companies and credit worthiness?
Well, let me say something to that. Our company, I got an email that I thought was kind of a spam email. Turned out it wasn't. It was from a company. It's actually a Berkshire Hathaway company, and they deal with relocation companies that have employees that are moving to Louisville that are foreign nationals, but they don't want to buy a house. They just want to rent. So how do you get paid on that as a realtor? So nobody wants to deal with them. But they'll pay like $50 an hour to the agent, and each person is approved up to like 3 days. So $1,200. And the 3 days can be broken down over a month, an hour here, 2 hours there. Every conversation you have, it's $50 an hour. So I thought, well, I'm going to try this, because I thought going into a mini recession, that may be a good side hustle for a couple of our agents, but I need to understand it first. So I've dealt with 6 of these people so far. They come from France, Mexico, Germany, and most of them are engineers and finance executives. The job is to help them with a driver's license, Social Security, housing, a bank account, help them buy a car. I've helped 2 of them buy a car, and help them if they need school, for their kids. Well, it's so, so one of them wanted to rent a house. Well, there's a company in Louisville that's a corporate buyer that owns, I think, 80% of the stock in nice houses. After we looked at about 12 houses, we applied for one. Well, they don't have credit. immediately they can't rent a house. And a lot of this stuff is that they want to buy a car. So they go in, they're making 100,000 a year a piece. It was a couple, each of them made 100 grand. They wanted to put 10,000 down and borrow 8,000, 17% interest, because they have no credit. And a lot of times it's like, you can't get insurance because you don't have credit on your car. Your driver's license, you have to have your social security card, and your social security card, you have to have your this. I mean, it's just so, and these people are just super smart people that are being discriminated against based on the fact that they are from another country, but it's just the way the system is rigged. So you have to can't open a bank account unless you have a license. But there are some banks that will allow it, but it's just so hard on these people coming to America. And we need those jobs. I mean, these people are working for Ford, the battery plant that's coming in. I mean, we need these smart people to come in and help with our shortage of labor, yet we're making it so hard on them. And they have great credit in France, but they don't look at that. So anyway, it's just a different kind of a thing, and it's very frustrating for these people.
And that's an interesting take, because it's not a side of society that we see on a daily basis. So it's interesting that you're coming across that now.
Yeah, well, because I got mad after about a week or two. I thought, these people, the deck is just stacked against them. And the only reason is because they're not Americans. You know, they're not, I mean, but they're supposed to be here, and they want to be here, and we need them here. And they're great people. Yet America is just not, and it's more the corporate side, I guess, that puts up these barriers to helping them get assimilated into the US.
Well, Lamont, that's one of the things when we deal and talk about diversity, equity, and the inclusion part, it goes directly to that on how you deal with people that you may not normally deal with.
Mhm.
And it often comes down to, how does it affect you financially? Will you do something a little bit different if it's going to affect you differently? But the truth to the matter is that that's been going on for years and years and years in different ways for different races as well. And so it's good to know that our minds are opened up so that we start thinking different, because every time we think different, it helps. It makes a difference, not only to someone that's new coming here, but to others that have been here for years and are still dealing with the same type of challenges.
That is true. That is true. I've dealt with the same thing with my Somalian clients. I've sold houses to maybe 20 some odd Somalians, and I have to almost be them when I'm working with them. I have to go with them everywhere to the bank. I have to do everything with them in order to get things to happen, partially because of the language barrier, and partially because they don't understand how the system works in America. They think this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. Why am I going through all this? But I know what they have to go through before they go through it. So I help walk them through it. I'm losing money, but I'm walking them through all this stuff as if I'm them, to get them through the credit issues, to get them through the purchases, when they have to use alternate credit. I have to go with them to get their documents that they need. And a lot of stuff I have to do personally. It's a lot of work, but just to get them through. So I understand what you're saying there. But I wanted to mention on the stereotype part. Spoiler alert! I'm going into the one chapter further, and they start talking a little bit more about privilege in the stereotypes. And there was one example. They were speaking of a lady named Carla, and Carla was a professor at Yale. Well, she was knitting and sewing or doing something, and she cut her wrist, and she hurt her hand. And it was pretty bad. So her husband wrapped it up, rushed her to the hospital, And the doctor was treating her and was saying that, oh, well, it's no problem. Don't worry about it. We just stitch it up real quick. The quicker you do it, the better. We'll stitch it up real quick and you'll be just fine. Well, as she was in the clinic, a student came in and saw her and said, Professor Carla, what are you doing here? And the doctor looked and said, Professor. And her husband said, yes, she's a professor at Yale University. He said, oh, you're a professor at Yale University? All at once, she went to a whole different status. They rushed her. They got the top surgeons, started rushing her up to the top surgeons in the hospital. They got her with the top surgeon, got her operated on. When she got done, she was in good condition because they had done a very, very good surgery on her because they knew who she was because of her status. And so the question was, if she had just been Carla, how would her hand have turned out? Would she have gotten the same? She wouldn't have got the same level of service, of course, but how would she have turned out? What would the impact of that have been? And so it went on to say that what if she came in with a plaid coat on and a pipe in her jacket, looking like a Harvard professor? Would there have been a different situation in her just coming in, besides a student alerting them that she was a college professor? So the privilege came into part because she obviously got privileged when they found out that she was a Yale professor. And so that was in chapter 6, I think. I went a chapter further. But how differently things are when you're perceived, how you're perceived.
Well, and Curtis, I mean, I read that chapter too, and that story about Carla's hand. And it made me think about a lot of things. We several of us talked about traveling and the difference of when I travel and I am dressed up in a suit and how I am treated versus if I've got my Lulu travel pants on and my book in my hand. And and I know that that's a minute example compared, but absolutely. I mean, you talk about the privilege and I think that comes into play also a lot in what we do every day in our business. From how we show up and from everything from the first 15 seconds of what we say, how we look, what we drive. Definitely.
Yep. I went to this little store near where I live, and I go in there all the time. And I always used to have a shirt, towel, and I'm dressed pretty, decently, when I go in. But one day I was in a rush. It was winter day. It was real cold, and I said I got to run over real quick. I'm not putting any clothes on, so it was a hoodie. I don't even have a hoodie. I think it was one of my kids' past hoodies or something. I don't know where it came from, but I put this hoodie on and had the hood on my head and ran to the store. And I ran to the store. I was looking around, and the guy, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I'm coming to see what I want. That's why I'm here." And well, hurry up. And I said, "What's going on with this guy? What is he lost his mind?" And then he put me out the store. "You have to leave." I have to leave? Are you serious? He told me I had to leave. Of course, I'm trying to find the owner after that. And I didn't realize what was going on because I forgot I had the hoodie on. He just called me with a hoodie on and stereotyped me because I had the hoodie on as opposed to when I come in with my shirt and tie. And so I said, wow, that's what it was because I had that hoodie on. I didn't realize that it would have that big of an impact, but he actually literally put me out of the store.
Curtis, when I was, before I started my company, I worked for a guy named Bill Stout Properties, and he owned an 80-unit apartment building community off of Lower Brownsboro Road, and he let me list it. And I remember that one day this young guy in a Corvette came up, had a big watch on, and I was like, oh yeah, this is my man. This is going to be the guy. And turned out, he couldn't even come close to doing the deal. A few weeks later, this old guy in a Dodge Caravan rolls up, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I got to show this whole place to this dude. He ended up paying cash for it. And I just remembered that lesson of never judge a book by its cover, because you know, not only did he buy it, he allowed me to sell it for him a few years later. It became a really good client. And, you know, he was a retired president of a company and, you know, but he didn't flaunt it, you know. But he was, yeah, so just a little bias there.
You know, that takes me back, Lamont, to one of the things that they were talking about, and how you can end up being a part of what was the word of the group? Let's just put it like that. But again, you even being a part of the group, you can end up discriminating or having those discriminatory thoughts in your own mind. And you know, it was interesting when they started talking about elderly people. And elderly people, they said they don't want to look at themselves as being elderly. They want to look at themselves as being, what do they say, like 18 years old? And that's what keeps them going. And then I remember them making reference to whitening your resume. And that was something that Black folk do from time to time. And I used to do headhunting. And so doing headhunting was easy. It was interesting when I had friends that worked inside a company and even banks that we know here in town. And I would say, hey, I've got a person that looks like they're going to have what you all need in your department. And Carl said, well, if it says they graduated from Kentucky State, even though they're white, they're not going to interview them. And they didn't interview them, which was interesting and funny. But that's kind of how it goes. And so I've known people for years, just like they asked, do you take certain things off the wall because they feel they're going to be discriminated against and stereotyped being a Black person. So do we remove things from the house before we sell the house? So those things happen not only there, but they happen when people look for jobs. And that was the case of when they were talking about whitening the resume. So you can't tell they went to a Black college, nothing that indicates that they might be a person of color. So.
You know, Lester, one last thing, and I know we're 4 minutes over, but you know, that was discussed yesterday. We had a class and the teacher, phenomenal. She, you know, is in a biracial marriage, children, and she was teaching, you know, business clinic. And we were taught at the very end, she was saying, you know, there was a house she sold 5,000 over list price. She was like, it shouldn't have even appraised for the list price. She comes in and she told her client, she said, take all of this off. And she was talking about having those fierce conversations and being able to have those conversations in the right way with our clients because they are looking for us to help. And she said, literally, they had a Ring doorbell. Appraiser went in, was in there for 6 minutes, and it actually appraised for 5,000 over even the 5,000 of the list price. And, you know, she said, now, who's to say? I can't say that would have happened if they had left things up on the walls and done those things. But she said, you know, we as realtors, we know what's going on. We've been attuned. If you are in tune and you're having these conversations, you know, it still exists. And I think there's still a lot of people that are in denial that stuff exists. Right. So, and this book is it's a great book because it walks you through. And again, it sets you up to say, you know what, you cannot be ignorant to the fact that, yes, this still exists. And even though we are all good people, I think everybody on this, like I've said, is good people, we still have that unconscious bias as hard as we try.
Well, with that, unless there's another comment, if not, then we're going to go ahead because we're going to respect everybody's time. It's 1:06 right now, and Jessica and Elizabeth, thank you all so much for guiding us and leading us through this this conversation. And we'll pick it up from where we left off. And for those who haven't had time to go through the book yet, you still got time because our second part of the conversation will take us from chapter 5 through the end. And so thank you for your time. I appreciate what you do. And on behalf of DEI and Lamont, I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, again, thank you all for, this was a very lively conversation. So it really helps when you prepare and read the book, read the material. So thank you all, Jessica and Elizabeth, for preparing and and everybody for chiming in. Really good. Always a safe place when we're on these calls that we can say things that maybe are uncomfortable, but it's real. So thank you all for that. And then we'll have round two. When's the next call? Do we have that set yet?
As far as the schedule, keeping it on the fourth Thursday of the month, it'll be November 24th.
Okay.
That
Is that
sounds good, but that's Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
That's Thanksgiving.
We'll come over to your house and just maybe break bread. And,
Yes, the more the merrier. Let's do it. Now, so what do we want to do then? Do we want to do it the week before? Let me see what we've got.
and we can send out.
We'll
talk about it and
about
then
it.
send something out and see if that looks
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Yeah. And it looks like the week before, Lamont, may be the best, although we'd be getting back from NAR about the, 13th, 14th, 15th, somewhere in through there.
Right.
And then we'd have a couple of days and maybe we can do that instead of, or pushing it earlier into the next week. But yeah, like you said, let's send something out and get it locked down. But Elizabeth, since you're most of the way through the book, do you and Jessica want to continue leading the conversation the next time, or how do you all want to do it?
Absolutely. I mean, and depending on the date, if I'm not going to be available, if I'm traveling with KYR, because I some of those dates I will be, I will reach out and we can get somebody involved.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
it is good seeing you on the call, Josh, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.
Yes, sir. Y'all have a great day.
Is the heat
Okay,
off?
thank
Bye.
you.
All. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Turn off, Josh? Turn the heat up.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm here. Oh, it's too cold in Kentucky. I mean, what are y'all
I was
doing?
thinking, can
I know
we
he
not,
wanted
is the
first
heat not
coat.
on? Can we not afford our heat at the
I know.
office?
Crank it up to
It's
64.
warm, but I just ran in from lunch and I'm like, Kyle and I were talking. He goes, buddy, what kind of weather have we rolled up on here in Kentucky? I said, buddy, this sentence says it's not even cold yet.
No, it's
No,
not.
it's
It's
not.
not.
I
We'll have
told
to
him
get
he
your,
needs to
winter
purchase
suit
some flannel
today
sheets
out.
because he was
Bye,
crying
guys.
about his bed sheet.
Bye.
Goodbye.
See you
All
guys.
right, see y'all later.